Good morning, Mr. Raccoon. How are you doing? Oh, here he comes. He's coming up, coming up. Oh, I missed him. Now, if you guys have never done that in your living room when you get a brand new ice shack, I don't think we can be friends. Welcome to Tasler Guide Service. Sitting in the living room, brand new ice shack, playing with my whisker stick, making sure the Vexilars work, having a beer. Not a bad way to end the day. The ice is just now forming around me. We don't have safe ice yet, so it's still a little trapping season. So this week we're going to have a trapping video. I'm going to show you some catches. I'm going to show you how I make my snares and how I anchor them. But there are a lot of pros and cons to running snares. They're fast, effective, they catch anything that comes down the trail. They're also relatively cheap, especially if you make your own, which I'm going to show you how I make mine. But there are some major downfalls. You know, in Iowa, you can't set a snare within 200 yards of a house without written permission. Now, if you're a road trapper, that cuts down on the areas that you can set. Quite a few farmhouses around. So if I got to stay 200 yards away from a farmhouse, that's going to cut out a big chunk of valuable property that I could stock up the fur. Also, pelt damage. Snare pulls tight, it leaves a bruise on the hide and damages a line of fur, which normally isn't a big deal. Now, when I was shipping furs up to Canada for the World Auction, you get a raccoon in the snare, they automatically deduct a size, which is money. So snares are great, they're effective, but there are some downsides. So for beaver and river otter, I find it pretty tough to beat. But for the other fur bearers, I usually use leg holds or dog-proof traps for raccoon. As my videos develop, I will eventually show you all the strategies I use to catch fur bearers and manage the population. So you will learn that there is more than one way to skin a cat. You just got to find the most effective means for that situation. Well, that's about all I got, and the fish aren't biting very well. So I'm going to finish this beer, tear everything down, then start editing this video. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Alright, first set of the year. We got a farmer's fence out in the middle of the field here. And we got our beaver run that goes down into the water. So we harvested a coon. We're not after coon right now because they're not prime. There's very little fur on this coon, so it's not even going to be able to be sold. The problem with beaver trapping is 9 times out of 10 you got to thin out the coon before it leaves your trap open for the beaver. So first set, we are 1 for 1. We got 20 traps to go. Same result, Mr. Coon. Got to thin him out, and then hopefully we'll get some beaver out of here. So we dispatched the coon, we got it cut out of the snare. I'm gonna go down and show you how I do a remake. First, the coon grabs anything it can. So a good tip is make sure that you clear out all the sticks, especially the thistles, the burrs, anything that can get in its hair, because they just roll and make a mess. You can see our snares all rolled up. So what we do is we use pogos, which I'll show you later. I'll show you how we make them. And that's our stake. We don't use our rebar, but we use these giant snap rings. So it's nice and easy to remake a set. You just take your old snare off. I'll take that home, I'll cut all the useful parts off it, and that'll become a new snare. So we take our new snare that we made, slide it right back on, make sure our trap tags are legible. Slide it right back on the snap ring. Okay, we have our support wire, which is just a number 9 piece of wire that we've been a fold in. I'll show you that as well. We'll open up our loop to our desired size, a little bit bigger than a hand, and we'll screw our whammy in. Okay, as you can see, this snare is kind of tilted to one area, so once it's tight, all you gotta do is take it and twist the cable itself, and you want your snare straight up and down. Okay, the coon has this kind of messed up. You can still see the main trail go right through, so we're just going to kind of fluff up everything around it and give them that natural path before the coon destroyed it. Now we got a good hanging snare right in the center. Hopefully tomorrow we got a beaver. So evidently the coon didn't get the memo. So this is a beaver run. Got doubled up. And like I said before, that's just part of it. The first few days you got to thin out the raccoon because the coon population is so much higher than the beaver population that the chances of them finding the trail first, coming down the trail first, is higher. So we got to thin these guys out. And if this was, you know, Thanksgiving weekend where the furs were a lot better, we wouldn't feel as bad. But you know, they're starting to get prime, but they're not there yet. So most of these are just going to find the carcass pile and get buried with the rest of them. So thin out the coon, beaver will come. All right, we got a buddy's pond that is overrun. He's got a bunch of raccoon, muskrats, mink, river otter. So he wants everything out of here. He just had to restock it because it froze out. So as we're scouting around, you can see all the raccoon tracks along the water. And then you find this path that goes into the weeds. It's a nice skinny path, goes on up in there. We're gonna set some 110s in there, some little conifers, and that's where we're gonna pick up our mink and muskrat. And then we'll pick up our raccoon, otter, and he may have a beaver or two in here too. We'll pick them up on the trails with snares. So hopefully we pick up some mink and muskrat throughout the cattails. It's a nice smooth path. I mean, they're using it every single day. It goes between that rock and that cattail. So just look for pinch points in your trails and you can pick up some extra fur bearers. On good trails, it's very important double up. This is a good beaver trail. I don't know if you can really see it in the dark. Got a snare down low. Could even put one down at the water's edge. Then we got one where the rocks kind of choke down the trail. Picked up a beaver up here and picked up a coon down here. So you got a good trail. There's no sense in not setting a couple sets. That's a big beaver. That's probably I don't know, he's over 50 for sure. That's a nice coon. So we picked up the beaver on top, the coon on bottom, which tells me that coon was probably caught first. The beaver went on by him, got caught in the second trap. So always pays to double up. And another very common sight on the trap line. Look at this old possum. No gray. We're gonna go ahead and let him go do possum stuff, and hopefully he stays out of my snares. What I want to do, I am not a professional snare builder by any means. I'm just going to run you through the way I do. Hopefully it helps you out a little bit. Most snares that you buy are a 5-foot length. I mean, that's just kind of the standard. And to me, any way I use a snare that's a little long, I start with a 4-foot piece. The way I look at it is if I make it a foot shorter, every 4th snare is free. Because instead of a 5-foot, I got a 4-foot. That also leads to less tangles and less waste. In Iowa, we have to have a deer stop. A deer stop prevents your loop getting any smaller than 2.5 inches. So I just use this tiny little nut. You can buy them. I buy all my supplies from Funky Trap Tag and Supply out of Guthrie Center. Alan Sayre is a great guy to deal with. He's a trapper himself. He has everything that you need. So if you're looking to get into trapping and need some supplies, get a hold of Alan and he will take care of you. He's a great guy. He's great for the trapping industry. He will steer you right. So all I do is I slide that small nut on, and I found that if you go 10 inches, you see my nice little tape measure here. You don't have to have anything fancy to be a trapper by far. But if I go 10 inches, that will leave me my 2.5. It usually actually leaves about a 2 3/4 loop. I'll make sure I'm legal. I've got this nice fancy setup here, and we're just going to pinch that tight. And that gives us our loop. Once I get my deer stop on, I go to my actual lock. I prefer the mini lock. And all I'm going to do, I'm going to have the bend. It's got a kind of an L-shaped bend. I want the bend towards the wire, and we're going in the top small hole. So we go our lock, and then we go a whammy, which is just a bent wire. It's got a big end and a small end. The small end goes down. So we go lock, whammy, and then we have our swivel. Our purpose is to allow the animal to roll without doing damage to itself. Above the swivel is just a washer that allows it to stay free, so when it's turning, it doesn't bind up and catch. And next, we just have a single stop. Once again, I'll show you all of these packages. So I just put my snap on the end, and I always double crimp it, and then it's nice and solid. So when the snare's set and animal's caught, they can't pull out of the swivel, and it rotates nicely. We got our washer up there to prevent any binding, and we're good to go. Okay, now we'll work on the other end. We just run our loop that's past the deer stop into the long hole. Make sure that our wire is not twisted in any way, and we put another single stop on. Once again, I'm going to make a double crimp, one on each end. Just make sure that cable, I don't have to worry about that cable coming out. That's it as far as the parts of the snare. Next, we're going to fine tune it, the end, and I just bend it as tight as I can get. And then I take my adjustable pliers and I'm going to squeeze that bend as tight as I can go. Now make sure it is in line with your slide. You just squeeze it as tight as you can. Makes a nice little L shape coming out your slide. If you purchase made snares, that's what it's going to look like. You're going to have a teardrop shape. They work effective. They work great. What I like to do from here is called loading the snare. It's going to make it a more round shape, and it'll actually close quicker. So what I do to load it, I open up the snare to the size I want. I want the loop about the size of my hand. In a lot of the books you read, you want like a 10-inch snare, which that right there is a 10-inch snare loop. I've found that I have more misses than I have with a smaller loop, no matter what the animal is. So if it's beaver, raccoon, whatever I want to catch in this snare, I still use the smaller loop about the size of my hand. So to load the snare, you set up your loop the size that you want, and I just take the handle of my swagger and I just rub it back and forth about 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Then you flip your snare over. Make sure that there's no kinks in it. Make sure the wire's laying exactly the way you want it. And again, I run it 3 times. 1, 2, 3. It's going to turn into a circle. Its job is to close quicker. Less resistance. It's going to hit that downhill slide and shut all the way down. Now, like I talked about in Iowa, we have to have at least a 2.5-inch gap, and that is right at 2 3/4. So that's a legal snare, and if a deer gets his hoof in there, he can pull out without doing any damage to the deer itself. Okay, the only thing left is to put on trap tags. Put the trap tags right on the swivel. In Iowa, anybody that is checking the trap has to have their name on the trap. And this is at all times. Set, in the car, in your shed. Whenever you have a trap and you are actively trapping, you have to have a trap tag on it. So I will put my trap tag on it, and I will put my trapping partner's trap tag on it before I go out tomorrow morning, and it'll be perfectly legal. So let's go through it one more time. We got our 4-foot piece of cable. First thing we're going to do is we're going to do our deer stop. So we thread our little nut onto the cable and we run it up 10 inches. Always favor more than less. If you have less, you're getting a ticket. So we got a deer stop on. We flip the cable over so the deer stop's at the bottom. We grab our mini slide. We're going to have the bend towards the wire. We're going to go in the small hole. Next, we're going to grab our whammy, small side down. Next we're going to grab our swivel. Then we're going to grab our washer. And then we're going to go to our single stop. We're going to thread it on and we're going to give it 2 crimps. Now that end of the snare is done. We're going to flip it over to the deer stop side. We're going to slide our lock down. We're going to go through the lock, making sure that the wire is not twisted. It's nice and straight. We're going to put our other single stop on. Again, 2 crimps. Nice and secure. Once we have the snare made, we're going to pinch the stop and the loop. We're going to take our adjustable pliers. We're going to pinch it tight so it actually kinks the cable right where we want it. We're going to squeeze it as tight as we can. That gives us a nice L shape or U shape in our cable. Now that snare could be ready to go. But like I said, I like to load them. So I make the loop about the size of my hand. Come over to my swagger. Make sure my loop is exactly the way I want it. And I start pulling. 3 times, flip it over. Again, make sure the wire is exactly the way I want it. Go 3 times. Now we're starting to round out. So that way our snare falls right down, ready to grab. Then again, hits our deer lock. I always check every one. That's about 2 3/4. That's a legal snare, ready to go. We have set out our snares. We went and checked them. We were successful. After we dispatch the animal, we're going to cut the snare out. Usually if you roll the animal up on its back with these micro locks, you can get a little slack. You can get your wire cutters between the animal and the snare, 1 snip, and the snare will come off like this. Of course, it'll be kinked, it'll be ruined, but all the parts on this will still be good. I'm going to cut off the deer stop, slide my parts off. Now the nice thing about tagging the swivels is when I make my snare, I've got 2 trap tags already done. That step's complete. Now this cable, I'm not going to throw all of it away. If there's a straight chunk that is at least 18 inches long, I'm going to make a pogo out of it. A pogo is what we use to stake our traps down. It works a lot better than a rebar stake. It's a lot lighter. I've found that it holds a lot better, especially in mud. To make a pogo, what we need is 2 double ferrules, but it's just like a double-barreled shotgun. It's a aluminum fitting that crimps down and has 2 sides to it. So I'm going to run one side of the cable into the ferrule. Next, I'm going to go through the pogo. This is actually the pogo. It's a J-hook with a washer. When you drive the pogo in, you're going to drive it this way. Once I get this made and I get this driven in the ground, all I got to do is yank on my cable and it actually turns the washer so it's flat to the earth. Then it won't come out of the hole that you just made. It goes from straight up and down to flat, and that does not allow it to come out of the dirt. So I'm going to put my pogo on next, and then I am going to run it back through the double ferrule. And then I'm going to pull it tight. So you got a nice little loop there. Just like the snare, I always double crimp. So I'm going to use my redneck setup here. So it's nice and tight. This end's done. Next, all I'm going to do is grab another double ferrule, run it through both sides, and just leave a little loop. Once again, I'm going to double crimp. And you can also use a hammer. These things mash down pretty easy. You can just lay it down, hit it with a hammer a few times, and it'll flatten it out. I prefer the crimping. It's a lot easier on you. Okay, so that's our pogo. That's what's actually going to hold the snare or trap into place. The best thing that we've found are these large snap rings. We just run a snap ring into the top loop, and then we attach our swivel to our snare to the same snap ring. So now it's all one piece. You set your snare, you catch an animal, is undo the snap ring on the snare part, and then put a new snare in. This is going to stay in the ground the whole time. You got a remake set in less than a minute. The thing we're going to talk about is our snare support. That's what that whammy that we added when we made snares, that's its job. It's going to take my pogo driver, put it on the wire, and literally just stick it right in the ground. Once this is secure, as you see the bottom, we do a U and then another U. Once this is pushed in the ground, it will not be able to turn sideways. So when an animal hits it, it will not move. It's going to stay solid and allow that snare to work. If this is able to rotate, then the snare won't close. It will just move as the animal moves through it. We've got this off to the side of our trail. We're going to bend it over to our desired height. We're going to open up our snare and we're going to twist the whammy right on the number 9 wire. We're going to have our snare sitting about an inch off the ground, right in the center of the trail. Anything that comes through, you got it. Take you through some of the parts that we used in this video. Like I said, everything I buy is from Funky Trap Tag and Supply out of Guthrie Center. Give Alan Sayre a call. He will hook you up. So when you build the pogos, they're just going to send washers and J-hooks, which is pretty simple. You slide it through, you put the end of the J-hook in your vise, you tighten it down until there's no gap in between. Then the J-hook is made. You got your double ferrules for the pogos, and you have your heavy-duty split rings. So that's what you need to make the pogos. For your snares, these single stops, and also your deer stop. So you have to buy little nuts and also your single stop. You guys are still watching, I appreciate it. Hopefully you're entertained and maybe learned a little something to help you on your trap line. Please like and subscribe. Let's get the word out at Tasler's Guide Service. You guys have a great night, and we'll see you soon.